Welcome to Breaking the Silence of Design, a bi-monthly vodcast designed to discuss the issues of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in the built environment. My name is Karen Compton, and I am your co-host and principal and founder of A3K Consulting.
And I'm Gabrielle Bullock, your other co-host and Director of Global Diversity for Perkins and Will. And today, we are joined by a very special guest, Brenda Shockley, Deputy Mayor for Economic Opportunity and Chief Executive Officer for the City of Los Angeles. And we're happy to have you, Brenda. Thank you. So I'm going to give a little bit of intro. So Brenda was appointed Deputy Mayor for Economic Opportunity by Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti in May 2016. Brenda is was a political science major at Oxy and a graduate of Loyola Law School. Shockley served for more than 24 years as president of Community Build, which she helped found in 1992 to revitalize South Los Angeles in response to that year's civil unrest. Her work has led to more than $100 million in investment in education, employment, and training programs for young people in South LA. Glad to have you here.
We are so happy to have you. Thank you. So probably just jump into the conversation. On June 27th, Mayor Garcetti signed Executive Order 27. And it's really entitled The Racial Equity in City Government. What can you tell us and our subscribers about the Executive Directive, and how does it advance the economic agenda for the City of Los Angeles?
Well, slight correction, and it's only mentioned because the mayor takes great pride in the fact that he signed it on June 19th. On Juneteenth.
On Juneteenth.
Particularly very soon in response to and very soon after the biggest of the protests here in Los Angeles. And I'm proud to represent him because he did himself recognize that there needed to be the acknowledgement that there were promises that had not been kept for centuries, that we are still suffering as a result of those promises that were not kept, just the degradation and cruelty of slavery, that it now masks itself, but is ever present when you look at anything from education to mass incarceration to housing access to employment to health, all the things that are identified as positive indicators of a quality of life, that African Americans in those situations, we are just so sadly underrepresented. On the other hand, the negative indicators, the incarceration, the school dropout rate, the lack of health care, lack of education and training, we are just miserably overrepresented. So the mayor, when I came in as the deputy mayor for economic opportunity, that equity issue was first and foremost. I think we have an interesting combination here of cultures here in Los Angeles, and we have to really be careful not to end up trying to really have the competition of who was most oppressed.
Right.
That
doesn't advance anyone.
It doesn't, and we are all oppressed. But there is a history that makes the African Americans' presence and conditions in this country different from any other.
So how does the Executive Directive address? Because I read it. It's very thoughtful in terms of how it is constructed. It's very clear. How does it seek to address some of those inequities?
Well, it's aspirational in many ways, but it's very specific in others. Because Executive Directive 27, racial equity in city government, is really, again, an acknowledgement that the city has not had racial equity as a core part of its governance. that the notion of equity, which I simply can easily define as fairness, that the systemic and institutional and structural racism really served to make sure that there would be inequitable treatment. It could say that it was blind, it could say that it's post-racial, but if you look at the data, we African Americans are, again, as I described, always among overrepresented in those most destructive of the social indicators and underrepresented in those things that are going to provide and allow one to live their full potential.
Now, I believe city government includes both the hiring of people as well as procurement.
Yes, it does. And the way Executive Directive 27 is written, we're starting with a baseline. That's something we're working on right now. The final reports were due, the mayor signed in June. We had a sense of urgency. The final reports were submitted to my team actually last week, last Friday. We are furiously condensing them and preparing for our presentation to the mayor in anticipation that he will also now appoint the Racial Equity Task Force. Now, every department in the city, and there are 38, a couple of them are called offices, but they function as departments. So 38 departments in the city each had to appoint a racial equity officer that would be responsible for seeing that the plan gets in, works with the management team, and also participates and is automatically a member of the task force, because we wanted the racial equity officers in all of the departments to have that ability to share and to kind of explore the various ways that the city, a city that's now facing financial crises, how does the city, who still cannot delay addressing racial and social justice, how do you do that with these limited resources?
Okay. So speaking of disparities, so Professor Tyrone Howard of UCLA's Black Male Institute is leading the city's Disparity Study in anticipation of the passage of Proposition 16. Can you talk a little bit about the study and its potential impact on procurement?
Well, yes, one of the things I have to back up to is impact, Proposition 16's impact on Proposition 209. And 209 that is now been the law of the land for 24 years. For the first time, there's an opportunity to repeal that, because what's been evident in these 24 years has been the slowing down of hiring and the representation these 24 years later. In many cases, particularly like the University of California, you have less admissions, fewer admissions of Black students, students of color. But one of the things that I think we have to own up to is that our numbers in the state of California, we are the minority, the people of color with the lowest numbers. I say that to say that in the state of California, we are barely 7%, as you well know. But most people don't know. They see their friends, they see everybody, and they think the rest of the state looks like them. That's not the case. Here in the city of Los Angeles, it's still 9%. And then
9% African American.
9% African American. The county is about the same, maybe a little fewer, maybe 8.5%, but around 9% is what we use. But to give you a contrast to what I was saying earlier, we African Americans are 9% of the county population, but we are clearly in excess of 1/3 of the homeless population. So for me, you could start there and then go on. But that is ground zero. that is the case. And up until a couple of years ago, it was a 40% number. But with the inflow of homelessness, and now the inflow more, it's not just black people on Skid Row, it's anywhere you look. So that the numbers of African Americans experiencing homelessness is still going up, but the percentage number changes because you also have really quite a spike now in the last couple of years. This is also not unusual that the African American condition sort of is a precursor to what's coming for everyone. So now you have both the Latino number or Latinx number is up, as well as the white number.
And is the disparity study intended to try and document a better understanding from a numbers perspective of where the disconnects are?
No, the disparity study has turned into like a term of art, and I'm sure, Gabrielle, you know, because after Proposition 209 passed, that was just very flat out blanket rejection of any race-based policies in the public sector. There were challenges. There were Supreme Court challenges, and the sort of ruling one is a case that says if you really are pushing and you really believe this, you have to conduct a disparity study that shows the urgency and the compelling need to institute programs like this. So the proposition, if you look at it like this, is Proposition 209, which Proposition 16 will repeal if we all vote.
Correct.
And we vote down ballot,
right,
because everybody's concerned obviously about the top, but it's super important because there are several propositions down ballot, one of which is Prop 16, that really needs the support. Right now, and people are sort of they don't pay attention until kind of late.
Yes. So
it would be wonderful anyway, any network for us to make sure that people are aware and to urge them to do that. We successfully did that the last time with Prop HHH, which was $1 billion bond issuance in order to build housing. And then there was Measure H in the county that would provide services to that housing that was built. But it really took a lot of campaign. It took a real campaign, it took hands-on, and we were able to get it passed. But that same level of enthusiasm, the same commitment and recognition is needed if we're going to get 16 across the line. After Proposition 209 was passed, the City of Los Angeles amended its charter to be consistent with what both the Supreme Court and the electorate had said. So two things will have to happen. Even assuming success in the passage of Prop 16, there will be a need for still a disparity study to be able to show the compelling need. And that's what using our racial equity plans for each department. Because remember, Executive Directive 27 is an internal-facing executive directive, but it requires all of the departments that are doing services, they have to give their census for their department and have recommendations, but also they have to have recommendations or commitments to what they're going to do for any services that are made available that you are able to contract for, and also look at any barriers to the participation by African Americans and other people of color. So that's sort of a two-prong. I will say this, and I can say it with some authority because the mayor said it 2 days ago, is that regardless of what happens with with Proposition 16, we're not trying to unring the bell. We will just have to find more creative ways to institute the racial equity internally in terms of how the city governs. And I was willing to take this position because the city was willing to check its own house first. And
that's very important.
I agree. That's how I felt. That it's very important that we show we're able to face and confront the things we're asking others to do. So in this extensive study, every department is turned in, and we have the data on every department, and the data tells a story, because you can look at it at first glance and okay, well, it doesn't look so bad. Blacks have this percentage.
Then you start digging in.
Then you started looking in further, and you find out where are people stuck. You find out about people who are at entry level. We created something called targeted local hire that really reaches out, and so with civil service, you're choosing off the list, but with targeted local hire, for people who need that second chance or truly a first chance. They fought hard for the civil service process and the like, but they also understand that if they want their unions to grow and if they want to have the support of the community, there has to be access for others, that it cannot be a closed process.
Now, we were talking earlier. You started out as kind of an activist, and this is not, as you said, this is not your first rodeo.
No.
This is maybe your third.
No. Listen, and these young men, I get so tickled because, so it's fair enough. I was an adult, and let's just cut to the chase. Sunday, I will be 74 years old.
Oh my. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
So I was a first-year college student in 1965, and I was working on Avalon and Slauson for a wonderful woman by the name of Mary Henry, who ran the Avalon Carver Community Center. I was working there as a summer college employee, and I really will never forget about 3 p.m. when she came to me and said, "Baby, you should start moving toward home because something's about to happen." I didn't know what it was, but by the time I got home, I was passing the National Guard and tanks and the like. And I remember how we were on curfew. In 1965, La Brea was way far west. So we were like held at Crenshaw, I think. We weren't allowed to either cross Crenshaw or Normandy, one of those. And it lasted for some time. Out of it, there was also, a number of deaths, I think something like 50 or so, the destruction, and really became the precursor for the next year when all of America caught on fire. When Detroit, Philly, DC, you name it. And in a lot of ways, I think the Watts, it's not that Watts started it, it's just that people have that energy of being fed up at the same time, which is not unlike what's happening with Black Lives Matter and all the people that are coming out and recognizing that, as you put it so beautifully, that silence only helps the oppressor. Silence never helps the oppressed.
So you lived through this in the 60s.
Yep.
Lived through it again in the 90s.
And then by the 90s, and in the 60s, I was practicing law, doing school desegregation, still doing civil rights litigation, because Crawford versus School of Education, the whole issue around busing and LAUSD, from which came the permits with transfers and so forth, which was only really called, what we called then, it was one-way busing. You could bus the minority children out, but you could not bus the, quote, majority at that time, white children.
And full disclosure, I was on a PWT.
Well, see?
I was on a PWT.
And that has been one of those things. Ted Alexander, who was at LAUSD at the time, it was a way of him coming up with getting African American students exposed to the quality of education they deserved. And they had to travel for it. And I know people that got up, an hour wasn't bad for people that were coming from Watts and going into the valley. But it was still much too long, and it also created, the children were out of their community so much that there wasn't the ability to have this sort of sense of community and neighborliness that we had, say, when it was in the 60s.
But you built community. I mean, you truly engendered and built community in your work in South Los Angeles. So how do you envision today what partnership to build community looks like, particularly for us in the design profession? What's the kind of...
Just going to ask that.
All right. Well, let me just say, I'm very proud to say that in 1992, with Congresswoman Maxine Waters, when Peter Uberoff was downtown starting Rebuild LA to rebuild it like it was, and she called together all of the sort of, quote unquote leaders, but really she called together the people who cared and said, are we going to go down and be a committee of the Rebuild LA, or are we going to do our own thing here, because rebuilding won't help us, just like what was here didn't help us. So from that, we agreed, and at that time, it was the Brotherhood Crusade, it was 100 Black men, it was Black Women's Forum, it was the three, at the time, we had 3 African-American banks, and then we also had the Watts Health Foundation, and the beautiful part of that is every one of those organizations put in, because we weren't going to then say, we don't want to play, but give us some money.
Yeah.
We weren't going to do that. So we raised the money among ourselves. And we raised about $200,000 that allowed me to sort of get a little office and get one assistant and then go looking to continue funding it. So I'm particularly proud that, yes, the doors are open, or it's open. I don't know, because of the pandemic, if the doors are open, but it's operating and it is working. And sort of my last project there was completed and opened on January 6th when the mayor came, and the first permanent supportive housing project under Proposition HHH was a community build project. But to get back to your question and to segue from when we started, because that was in 92, that, and Leimert Park, if you were around, they burned down Dobson's Market, they burned down another sort of a men's lodge that was next door. Well, that became an opportunity for us because we had gotten money from the federal government and for programs, but wisely, the consultant I was working with and who also worked with NOMA, Craig Cummings said, do not spend all this money out the door. Have something to show for it. And from there, we started looking at what was needed, because even then, even in 92, it was clear that if there's going to be an identifiable African American community in Los Angeles, it was going to be Leimert Park, View Park, Windsor Hills, Ladera. That had the highest concentration and the greatest stability. And you had Leimert Park, which it declared itself the center for where culture meets commerce. That was where the community would be. And it's turned out to be the case when you're looking at the Crenshaw line and you're looking at other things.
And Destination Crenshaw.
Destination Crenshaw. So on the corner of 43rd and Degnan, we saw there were a lot of people building housing at the time, because housing, there was funding for that. We wanted to strengthen the commercial development in the area. And one of the things is that we wanted to have people coming there and being there as a place where they came to work. Well, in order to do that, we had to build an office building for them. There was one building on, and still is, it's a Chase Bank building, but it's owned by not Brotherhood Crusade, it's owned by Danny Bakewell Company. And that was kind of the only one. In fact, my first law office was in that building when it was called Great Western. So we wanted to build a really inviting building that had commercial on the front so that people could come and get the things that, and back in those days, I don't know who would remember, but it was Fifth Street Dick, who had a coffee house that he ran on 43rd Place. And we were able to work with Dick and sadly he passed not that long later, but he had started on his own, if you remember the guy sitting out playing chess.
Yeah.
So it had become its own natural destination. We just wanted to put more things there for when people did come. So we built, what at that time was 16,000 square feet. It's to fit with the design of the village. For those who know the village, they have like that little upstairs kind of a loft, but the area will only go up 4 floors anyway. But the way this was designed, it was part of, and now I'm getting design nerdy, because in the portion of all
we
this,
like design nerdy.
well, I have to tell you that
I know you had
the
a
course of
question now.
this, I learned that Leimert Park was also built by the brothers that built Central Park. That Leimert Park, the development of the housing and the like, was one of the first planned unit developments in the country. So that you did have a consistency of style with the storefronts and the smaller, and because it was Leimert Park Village, and it created that. And when I was growing up, the market was there, and lots and lots. Last time I actually went to the Leimert Park Theater when it had its sort of and I was in like maybe junior high school even then. It was a long, long time ago, and it is only appropriate that it ended with Imitation of Life was the last thing they showed there. Anyway, all that's to say we were able to buy the property, and then we went on our search for African American architects because we were determined that we were going to have African American architects in. You still, as you well know, you put out the RFP for everyone, and we had a lot of great responses, but we had this, absolute commitment. And we ended up with RAW, which I think in its earliest years it stands for Roland A. Wiley. But at the time, it was Steve Lewis, Roland Wiley, and Steve Lott, and Brian Williams. And it was a very wonderful collaborative process, because along the way, the property next door became available, but it was too late to expand the other, but we were able to create a pocket park. And I've often thought that was really fortuitous, because had we had the land, of course you made a bigger building, because you could try to get more rents, but it would not have been the same community. So by the time I left, the popular Aki Bamboo was there. I had also sort of convinced Barbara Morrison that she had an audience there, because she was actually doing so much on the west side. But she was looking at a place on Adams. I said, well, if you're looking that close, you can come look over here. And she's been there forever. Now.
I just want to ask a question about what you've been talking about, and that's the importance, the cultural connection between, you're committed to, at the time, to bring in Black architects. Can you explain shorthand to those who may not understand how important it is for work in the community, design work in the community, to be representative of that community? Because you change what you design by changing who designs it. So
yes, and you also start with a little head start, because you don't have to really explain what you need, because these are the same people that come to that same area. They know the area. They spent a lot of time looking at how, we wanted something that harked to the past but was clearly the future. And from that, I have to say, we were, I think, pretty catalytic, because if you go there now, the wonderful Mark Bradford has a gallery there that is as good as any gallery. You'll go anywhere in the country. He purchased and has programs on Lamert Boulevard for foster youth that you have other people. Once we made that investment, and often that's what they say nonprofits are, you know, we're sort of the canary in the
coal mine.
Right, to see, well, you know, it's not really their money, so let's see if they can make it work and if they'll take the first step. And you have to show that we have confidence in what we're doing.
But it sounds like what you learned is that it was important to not just listen to the people within the community, but to also actively engage architects and people who understood the community, so that it was that collaborative partnership.
But also what made it really helpful was that you had, out of that process, came an ongoing neighborhood stakeholder process that they were meeting every week, and it took a few years, and now I think they meet every month. But where you also have people who are from the community, like Roland, who is patient and comes and explains that what are the reasons why maybe what they think they want maybe won't work, or it's too expensive, but for them to be a part of the process. And that is where I think you do need, there's no way around it. I sit at a table with a lot of people who are good people and they care, but they don't know my experience. And that's what we take to our communities, especially when they have been traumatized by a civil unrest that's burned everything around them down.
As much as I want to continue this conversation, it's time.
All
I'm
right.
sorry.
Okay.
We've actually run out. We've actually run out of time.
Wow. Well, I hope I didn't take too much.
No.
time.
It's been a great conversation. What are your final thoughts for our subscribers? What do you want people to come away from this conversation knowing?
Well, I think that what I would like people to come away with, and I thought about this because I thought about the title of this podcast, that it doesn't matter the industry or the sector, the nature of the experience, courtesy of structural, systemic, institutional racism, it is the same. It may be configured in a different way, but the results become the same. And even for those who, to others, it appears, we've succeeded, we all know the scars we carry. And we really have to make sure that doesn't have to continue. That doesn't have to be the price for being able to live a life that allows you to seek what your passion is.
Deputy Mayor Shockley, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.
And thank you to IBI Group, our sponsor for this vodcast, as well as all of our vodcasts. We appreciate you, our followers, our subscribers, for tuning in, watching, and listening.
And thank you to our followers and subscribers. And you can continue following us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube. And so join us next time when we have another firm leader have a difficult conversation in the hot seat.